Can you hear me now? Testing, 1, 2. Can you guys hear me? I see. Let's add some filters to this. Hello. Testing, 1, 2. Okay, good. I think I had a filter on that was supposed to do like some noise suppression, and I think that was actually killing it. So I apologize if you guys couldn't hear anything before. This is my first time doing this. So my name is Stephen Hodson, and I am a developer at Valorum doing immersive experiences for Windows Mixed Reality. And I want to go through the input system with you guys, and I really wanted to make this interactive as much as possible. So if you guys have questions, don't be afraid to ask questions in the live chat. And we're going to go through just the stuff on the master branch. We're not going to be worried about doing anything in the development branch because the input system is quite different, and I'm trying to work on kind of getting us a path forward for that. So I've already went ahead and brought in the HoloToolkit into a blank project, and all we're going to do is create like kind of a basic UI and maybe some interactive elements that we could play around with. So the first thing I'm going to do is I have an empty scene already. In the toolkit, I'm just going to configure our project settings. Let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and enable the Xbox controller support, .NET scripting backend, and all the other settings that we'll need. All right. And then now I'm also going to update our scene, and all this is going to do is move our camera to the origin and give us a HoloLens camera prefab. All right. And for the HoloLens especially, let's go ahead and add microphone support. I don't think we really, and spatial perception. I don't really think we need anything else. Alright, so we have ourselves a blank scene. What should we make? I'm going to give you guys the option to give me some suggestions in the live chat. Did you guys want to do like something like a user interface? Do you guys want to do interactive elements? I know one person was interested in how to get things to focus, so let's do that first. Let's do 3D objects first. We'll worry about the UGUI stuff a little bit later. So we'll have a cube. We'll put it out in front of us a little bit. 5 meters is pretty good. And it looks like we're using the default material, so let's make our own. We're going to use the fast configurable. Alrighty. So it's important when thinking about the input system. So what's important about using the input system in the toolkit is that a lot of stuff has to go through a component that you write. And that's probably the most important thing. So a lot of people like to use the, let's get this out of here. They like to use the event system, the event triggers. And these are good to a point because you can assign objects and you say, hey, let's put this thing here and let's look at this thing and do something. The problem with this is that you can lose your references here very easily, especially when you have like a prefab or you have another object. So this can get missing and you have a lot harder time figuring out what's broken in your scene using these event triggers. So a lot of times it's recommended that you actually write it into your code. So I'll show you guys how to do that. Alright, so there's a couple of, hi, I'll try and be a little bit louder, guys, sorry. It's also how close I have to be to the mic. Hopefully that's better. Okay. Just one moment while Visual Studio catches up for us. I'm going to get rid of all of this initialization code from Unity. Alright, so when working with the input system in the toolkit, it's important to know about the interfaces. Oh, what's going on here? Oh, well. Give me a second, guys. Apparently it's not going to let me keep Visual Studio open. Give me one sec while I fix that. It'll probably be in another window so you guys can't see it. I'm still here. I'm still recording. Just give me a few minutes while I update this. Probably won't be minutes, but the first time is always wrought with technical difficulty. I have to restart Visual Studio in an admin mode? What does that even mean? Okay, run as administrator. Sorry, just trying to apply the key, and I will be back on. There we go. I don't know why that was such a hassle. Where is OBD Studio? Alright guys, I'm back. Okay, so let's go back to, I'm sure you guys could find all of this stuff on here. And I don't want you guys to just think. Okay, so we're going to go to the input stuff here. And I'm just going to go over a couple of the things as far as the interfaces that we need to be aware of. So we got the focusable, we got the holds and the input handlers, manipulation and navigation handlers. We got some speech stuff and gamepad stuff. So the first stuff that we're going to worry about is just highlighting, right? So let's see here. The eye, and this is part of the things that we probably need to make a little bit better is the discovery of some of these interfaces. So I'm going to go ahead and implement the focusable interface. It'll just give us the things that we need to do for that automatically. Let's see. And if I could spell. There we go. So all we're going to do is we're going to take two colors and we're going to add some color fields to this here. So alright, and that should expose it in the editor so that we can choose exactly what we'd like to see. So we can choose a normal color, let's make it some blue, and we can choose a highlight color. We'll do some red color. I believe it should be black for the, okay. The other thing we could do if we really wanted to update the color right away, see here, that's not what I wanted. On validate, I think that should be good. We're going to get our game object. Actually, before we do that, go ahead and implement some of our Unity APIs first. And what we're going to do is we're just going to cache our renderer. And this is important because this is probably one of the bigger memory bugs in Unity. When you reference the material on an object, you can sometimes create a new instance of it. So it's important to cache your material and then handle it later. I'm going to use, for the just sake of simplicity, I'm going to use the shared material though. And when we press play, oh, look at that, didn't work. That doesn't surprise me, actually. Oh, let's see. like structures and folders. Okay, so sorry, I was doing this thing and I just looked back at the live chat. So Volt, Volth, Volthek asked about folder organization and tips in Unity. So really that's more of like on a per project basis and how your organization kind of feels like that should be it. Generally, I like to keep things pretty organized. So if you notice that the toolkit has a couple of different folders, and they're feature areas, and inside of those it kind of goes in more detail about shaders, scripts, prefabs. Personally, I follow those sort of things within my own apps, but I generally don't break up the feature area too much. Usually I'll go my own folder and then do the same kind of organization. Let's see here. So I was going and trying to get this to be its color right away. Probably don't need this. I'm actually kind of surprised that it didn't take the normal color. I'm wondering if this is a different name in the shader property. That color isn't actually what it is. So we might have to do a material property block. This is probably the hardest part about highlighting, is handling the colors of your materials properly, because this is actually a big issue, because if you have a lot of material instances, you can have the worst memory leak in Unity. So if I was using the standard shader, that's what I thought it would have worked. So with this mixed reality fast configurable, I bet it's albedo. That's actually what we're changing, and that needs to be on. Okay. So that's what was going on. Okay. I knew it was something simple. Okay, so let's go ahead and get the rest of our scenes set up. I'm going to go back to here. I know this sounds silly, but I actually follow the getting started guide more than I probably should in creating my first ones. Here we go. So we already did this with our main camera. We do need to add the default cursor. And then we also need our input system. Our input manager, sorry. Alright, so now we got our input manager. And this should have everything kind of set up already for us. The only other thing we need is an event system from the UI. Alright, now I think we should be ready to test. Alright, so we're properly getting our not implemented exception, which is exactly what we wanted. I hadn't written that part yet. So now what we can do is on focus center, we're going to get our render shared material color, and we're going to update it to our highlighted color, and do the same except in reverse here. That's all you guys need to make things highlight. The only important things to keep in mind here is doing myRender.material. This is bad because it creates a copy of the instance of your material. Using shared material is better, but the problem there is if you have more than one object, then they all change colors. So I'll show you that right now. So let's kind of put these guys off to the side here. Alright. Well, so you see how I highlight one and they both highlight, and that's the problem. So let's see if we can figure that out. So we could do the actual material instead of the shared material, but we need to cache it. Alright, so I believe this will work, but the only other thing we need to make sure that we add is a destructor. So this way it cleans up itself properly at the end. Where's on destroy? There we go. Alright, so once you do this, you should be good, because then that will circumvent the memory leak. Essentially what would happen is every time you would instantiate or on awake, you create a new highlight cube. Every time you destroy one, this material instance would still be in memory. So that's the problem. I'm going to make these just a little bit closer. Alright. Alright, there we go. So now we got 2 of those, and they're highlighting on their own. Harry, did you have any other questions about that? So we're not swapping materials. I saw that in your thing. We're just updating the color. So let me go back to the code real quick just so you can kind of see that. We have 2 public fields, our normal color and our highlighted color. We cached our render in awake, and then we also cached a material instance. This is also important. So after awake, we have our cache values. Whenever we get the focus enter or exit raised from the input system, then we just update the color on our material instance. And then when we destroy our object, we need to make sure we also destroy the material instance. Alright, so that's probably one of the more simple things with the highlighting and things like that. Did you guys have anything else that you wanted to go into? Oh, yeah, no worries, Matrix. Nice to see you. Did you guys have any other questions about the focusing or anything like that? Do you guys want another system that you guys want me to get into? So let's kind of extend on this a little bit more, this highlighted cube. Instead of naming it this, we're going to call it cube interactions. And what we're going to do is we're just going to build on what we already have to do our input click handler. So now we have a click action that can happen. So now you guys notice that I'm not using the event system that's built into Unity. I don't know if my audio was working for that. But with the event system, you have all of these built-in events that is called to the event system that's built into Unity. And the input system in the HoloToolkit uses all this stuff to kind of pipe that in. So it should pretty much be very similar. That's why you can use stuff in the editor, like if you wanted to click. was actually surprised that didn't work. Let's take a look at this. On input clicked. Oh, you know what it is? We have colliders. Interesting. Oh, I know why. I forgot to hold shift. Anyway, but that's the reason why you can get all of the same interactions on the UGUI stuff later on. You are using the keyword manager. Okay, yeah, let's do some audio stuff. We can do that. So let's go back into our cube interactions and let's add the speech handler. All right. So the important thing with the speech interactions is you got a couple of different things we can do. So on my input manager, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to create an empty. Create an empty object. It's going to be our speech input source. And we need to also add the speech input source script. And we'll add our first keyword. Let's see, what are we going to do with these cubes with the speech? Let's make them rotate. I'm just going to put arrow. I'm not going to worry about that. Let's just make it space. Okay, so with the biggest difference with the keyword manager matrix is that instead of the keyword manager, you actually have this speech input source. And you could still create all your keywords, and it's very similar to that other one. It's just how it kind of handles a lot of the stuff a little bit differently, or quite a bit differently. Let's see here. So once we have our speech input source, I'm going to move this up next to our input manager and actually create a manager object. Alright, now we have our scene cleaned up a little bit more. What I like to do is you could do the speech stuff two different ways. You can have global keywords, and what I like to do is I'll actually have a speech input handler on my speech input source for all my global keywords. So if I had one more, this is, let's say rotate all. This is going to be our global keyword, right? The thing I don't like about this is that it uses this built-in Unity thing that I was talking about earlier. Let's see here. So we're going to say transform. Actually, you know what? We'll create some stuff on our scripts here in a second. But for now, I'll just show you how to hook it up a little bit. So then the other thing we could do too is actually on our cubes, we could also do a speech input handler. And we're not going to put the global listener on this one, but we are going to just rotate, and it's going to be our object that's actually on it. We actually don't need this speech input handler on our object if we do it in code, and I'll show you how to do that. So it's essentially that speech input handler just kind of goes back in and implements the speech keyword recognized event data. So what we could do is in our event data, we can get a recognized text. can look for rotate. You know what? We're going to create an update here. And I want a boolean. Alright, and if we can rotate. Let's make it rotate. Probably should cache some of this stuff. Yeah, let's do that in awake. I didn't know that. Thanks, Julian. What am I missing here? Oh, it needs to be times equals. That's silly. Alright. And we need our initial rotation. I might use this later, I'm not really sure yet. So now inside of our cube interactions, we have our focusable, we have our input click handler, and we have our speech handler implementations. And again, the speech on speech keyword recognized is essentially the same thing as this speech input handler. The only difference is that this implements it so that you can do it in the editor. Alright, so these should be good. We're going to call on let's see, I still need to implement the all. So what we'll do is we'll just create another public and we'll actually call this here instead. That way when we go and do the global ones, then we can say, oh hey, let's see. What do we call it? Cube interactions? Alright. And we'll add both of our objects here. All right. Rotate. Rotate. I don't know if this will work in the editor or not. It's the only thing I don't like about using the code one is that you really have to know exactly what you're typing. Let's see. I'm wondering if it's because of how I have my setup too. It could be a problem, but it should work. I like to do the two lower. That way it kind of removes ambiguity when you're going through each of your speech keywords. Let's see here. I might just go ahead and use the, yeah, there it goes. So if you notice us doing them both because I had set it up to do both here. So let's do escape for that one. Rotate. There we go. Rotate. All right. So Matrix wrote, speech input source tracks all possible commands without specifying which objects the voice commands will act on. Speech input handler applies the voice commands to object with it as a component, correct? Okay, so what's going on is the speech input source tracks all of them, correct? So the speech input source is where you set up all of your keywords that you want to use, right? The speech input handler does the actions when the keyword is recognized, okay? So you set up all your keywords generally in the same place. You can have more than one speech input source, but generally I stay with one. Some people have multiple. You can break them up if you have them in different scenes, stuff like that, which is also important. And then you can also make them persistent as well. So say if I want to use these in other scenes, and your scenes go into from like one scene to another, you definitely want to have the persistent keywords so you don't have to create that in every scene. I don't know if that makes sense. So when you're specifying which objects the voice commands will act on, essentially what you're doing is you're doing that in code here. So this gets raised when any of your keywords are recognized. And what you want to do is in your code where you're enabling it, this is where you are specifying which object the commands will act on. And because this isn't a global object, it's not a global listener, the focus and the actions will only be on the object that you're currently gazing at. So if you're not looking at this object, then this will not get raised. Does that make sense, Matrix? Okay, so some of the other things to keep in mind with this is normally I put a default case, and sometimes it'll be an out of array, but for this one, if you have other cases, it's not going to know about them, because it doesn't. Could be an unbounded. It could be an unbounded set of keywords that not everyone's going to know. And that's the other thing that's kind of frustrating with the way that the input is set up, because only in the editor you can get the list of these keywords. And there's probably a way to do it. I would like to see that happen, but I think that it's a little difficult to do. So you kind of have to write out each of these. Again, you got two options to do this. You could use the speech input handler on each of your objects and implement it here, or you could do it in code. I would say go ahead and do it in code though. Matrix wrote, I didn't know that I needed the gaze at the object for it to hear the voice commands. That is correct. So if you don't have it set as a global listener, it's not going to hear the voice commands. And I can show you guys how to do that too. So there's actually a script. Let's see. Set global listener. This is a nice little helper. All it does is it registers the input manager, the game object that it's on. It registers the input manager's game object. Wow, I can't talk. So the input manager has a list of global listeners, and global listeners will hear all the events no matter what object you're looking at. And for the most part, you will only get an event raised if your gaze is on it. So if you're not looking at an object, it won't get the events unless it is a global listener. Does that make sense? Can we implement speech input source in code? I want to use a button text to cause the click event. Alright, Harry, let's see if we can do that for you. Let's see. So you're not going to be implementing the speech input code itself. You will still be doing the handler actions. So when you want to respond to an action, so you're wanting to raise an action. Is that what you're saying, Harry? I want to use the button text to cause a click event. Harry, I'm not quite sure what you mean by your question. Would you be able to rephrase that a little bit? So maybe going and trying to set up Harry's UI that he wants to do. Let's go ahead and try if we can create that. I'm just going to create a canvas. It's going to be world space. These things are always so big. See if we got some prefabs we can use. Let's do this UI text prefab. Oh, that's so much better. It's not like humongous. Alright, so from this I'm actually going to create more of a larger canvas prefab. First thing I'm going to do is break the prefab instance and then rename it. Okay, so Harry wrote back, I wanted to add the button text to the keyword array. Then when the text is heard, I want to call the onClick. I'll show you how to do that. So you don't have to, it's not that complicated. So you don't have to actually like register the button within the keyword array. I'll show you how to do that. So let's see, we got our text, we got our canvas, and let's make this about 2.5. Just making sure it looks good. I'm actually going to turn these guys off because they're just going to be in the way, most likely. And a couple of things. We'll add a billboard so that's always looking at us, and maybe a sphere-based tag along. Alright. Make this a little smaller. Okay, so I'm going to add a couple of things to our UI. Let's go ahead and add a button. We'll get rid of this text prefab. Alright. And we'll make our button a little bit bigger. Come on. I don't know if anyone noticed that when you tab now, you have to like hit enter again. That's the worst Unity update ever. That's really big actually. 64. Let's do 128. Let's see. And for our text, I'm just going to make this automatically fit. That's still kind of small. There we go. That's a little better. Okay, so the UI with the UGUI is a little bit different because essentially what the input system does is going back to these on-click events that Unity raises. So you're essentially getting the same things. So one of the important things with the input system is that we wanted to make sure that using UGUI and any of the other user interface tools should just work as they are. So that was the important thing there. So with your button, because we're using these terrible interfaces that lose their references, you could probably just use the speech input source, or the speech input handler, and add your keyword. Okay. Then I believe you can assign your button here and then call select. Does that explain what you'd need to do, Harry? And then your actual action for your click, you can do whatever you need to do. So let's say cube interactions, start rotate. Does that make sense, Harry? Alright, we're getting close to an hour, guys. And I'm using the 3D object as buttons. Ah, okay. Well, now you know how to do it for the UGUI. If you're using the 3D object as buttons, essentially what you want to do is inside of your script, let's see, I'm going to reorganize this a little bit. Let's see. I'm going to put all of my Unity API callbacks together. Alright. And just get rid of these. And I'm going to create another region here just for our input. Let's see. Alright. So what we have here is what we want to do, right? So instead of this here, we say start rotation. So essentially, you would just create a method that's not inside of your input implementation and call that method in both places, in your click and for your keyword recognized. Okay, so Julian wrote, I think he wants to add the text on the button as a keyword. Oh, that's interesting. The text on the button as the keyword. You could probably do that. You probably would have to create your own version of the source. So let's take a look at that code and see what it does. So this class is partial, so you are able to extend this class if you wanted to parse the text off of a button. I don't see why you couldn't do it. That class is written so that you can extend it, and essentially a lot of the stuff that you have here is already there for you to use. And you have an array that has your keyword and key codes. So essentially all you'd have to do is know all of your text objects, parse the text off of either the text component or the text mesh component, and then add it to that keyword and key code array. Does that make sense, Harry? Alright. Mincho? I think that's how I'm saying your name. I'm sorry if I'm destroying that. Mincho wrote, what is the benefit compared to adding HoloLens Input Manager into the event system? For example, I'm referring to button on click action. Okay, so the benefit is using the Unity GUI, right? So this is the built-in GUI system for Unity, and it's using all of the built-in events. And if you want to use the Unity GUI and get your speech commands, then you can add this input handler, call back to your button, select, which is the same as you clicking on it, and then call your on-click, doing what you really want to do. So essentially this is doing the same thing that we're doing in code for the cube interactions, except that we're not going through the Unity UI. Okay, guys. Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. We're at an hour now, and I want to start doing this as like a weekly thing. I know it was probably a little hard getting started at first, and this is my first time doing this, so I appreciate your patience, and hopefully I went over a couple of the more interesting things as far as like that, as far as the memory leak. I know Harry was having problems with that. I saw it on Slack, so well, you guys have a great weekend. I'm going to go hang out with my family, and you guys take care.